And for me, it was always that my research was focused on addressing, you know, really underrepresented populations, trying to, improve outcomes for populations that weren't doing as well on treatment, African Americans, women in some cases. And so, that energy, that passion that I had there really set me up to be able to come to industry and bring that same passion.
And now, from San Francisco and the UCSF Rosenman Institute, the Health Technology Podcast with your host, Christine Winoto.
Our guest today, Dr. Kimberly Smith, Senior Vice President and Head of Research and Development at ViiV Healthcare. She oversees the development of the ViiV Healthcare marketed and pipeline assets. Prior to joining ViiV Healthcare, she spent 20 years as an HIV clinician and researcher. She's the recipient of many awards over her career, recognizing her HIV patient care and advocacy, including the Black AIDS Institute Heroes in the Struggle Award, the Thurgood Marshall College Fund Award of Excellence in Medicine, the Clinical Educator Award, and the National Medical Association's School of Merit. Today, we talk over the importance of representation, her incredible career, and how to cause good trouble in the industry. Here's our conversation. Thank you for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So where are you based?
I'm based in North Carolina.
That's great. So it's almost the end of the day. I thought it would be really interesting for us to start with your background. You can share with us your journey on the choice of the career path that you took.
It's really interesting when you think about choices and career paths. Certainly at the time that I made decisions about what I was going to do with my life, I didn't imagine that I would be in the role that I am now. But things happen along the way. So I can tell you that from the time I was in high school, I knew that I wanted to become a physician. And it was almost like I was on a runaway train. It was going to happen. And there was never a diversion. I was always committed that was going to be the case. But it was when I was in college that I came to the conclusion that I wanted to become an infectious disease specialist. And that was triggered by the HIV/AIDS epidemic. I started medical school in 1988. And so, you can, if you've been around for a while, you'll remember that was really, I think, what we would describe as sort of the bad old days of HIV. I mean, at that point, there was one medicine that was approved, and that was AZT. That was approved in 1987. And as we know that it helped a little bit, it didn't change the course of the disease. And so, it was the bad old days, and there were a lot of people, young, previously healthy people, diagnosed, rapidly progressing from HIV disease to AIDS, and ultimately dying. And so, back in those days, I remember, sort of that was maybe early cable, but still, you saw your news, your nightly news, and routinely, I remember the protests that were always on the news of, from ACT UP mostly, demanding, that people do something about HIV. It's relevant now when we think about people like Tony Fauci, because he was kind of right in the middle of it then. I felt drawn to the field because it was fascinating from a scientific standpoint, but it was also really grabbed me emotionally because, it was, it was mostly folks who were marginalized folks in society, right? Folks who were gay or intravenous drug users were really the most who we saw in the beginning. And then you started to see that there were people who got different blood transfusions and all that sort of thing. But it was definitely stigmatized dramatically in those days, still is now, but certainly worse then. And so I was drawn to that. I wanted to be a part of doing something about it. And so, went to medical school and focused on really developing a career in infectious diseases. So after medical school, I did a residency in internal medicine and ultimately a fellowship in infectious diseases and focused my career on HIV because I just found it, I found myself drawn to it both from a social perspective as well as the scientific perspective. And so I launched my career in Chicago and I worked at, a university, but also at Cook County Hospital. So that university, was connected to Cook County Hospital. And so, it was, sort of the trenches, right, of, really sick people. And over the course of the early part of my career is when we started to have more and more treatment options. And so, thankfully, I got to be a part of the research and developing products and trying to understand how we could optimize treatment. And, so I spent, a 20-year career in Chicago as an HIV treater, researcher, educator, and advocate. I would say I always saw myself as an advocate. And then in 2013, the opportunity to join this, new company called ViiV Healthcare became available. And, ViiV was unique and is unique in that it's the only company that's 100% focused on HIV medicines and treatment. And the person who was head of research and development at the time was a mentor of mine. And, he basically kind of recruited me into the company with the vision that I would ultimately succeed him. And so that's how I ended up here as the head of research and development for ViiV Healthcare. That's a long story short, right?
No, that's great, and it's sum it up really nicely. I mean, throughout your time, when you see, like what make you think about like being the clinician and thinking like this, I want to do research and create a solution for HIV. How do you make that jump, or is this a natural kind of part of the package of being a physician?
Well, I just had the interest in this area, and so I found all the people that could connect me to the right path, and I would say I was extremely fortunate in that I came across people who became mentors for me, who were, from some of the people who were a part of the research for HIV from the beginning. And so they were exactly the kind of people you'd want to get connected to because they were committed to mentorship, to development of people. They wanted to teach people. And so I met people like Harold Kessler, who was one of my mentors, who was, really, saw some of the first cases of HIV in Chicago. Connie Benson, who is, sort of has played a huge role in HIV research, and she was a great mentor to me, and it was nice to see a woman leading the charge, and so she definitely took me under her wing. And I could go down the list of so many people that I met that connected me to opportunities to become involved in HIV research. And once I was in, there was always somebody offering me the next opportunity, the next opportunity. And, I just kind of took advantage of those and developed my expertise develop my, my research chops. And, but then ultimately I then became, the person who was grabbing the next person and bringing them along and teaching them the ropes on how you do HIV research, how do you get connected, how do you get NIH grants, how do you build a career as a researcher? And so I just would say all along the way, there was always somebody who was helping me along and giving me an opportunity. And so I see that as that's just the way you have to work in order to make, to develop a community of researchers of all stripes who can all bring something unique to the table.
Yeah. Maybe this is a good segue because you mentioned about ViiV as being unique to focus on HIV, but I always thought it's really interesting. It's a joint venture of two large pharma companies. Can you tell us more about that?
Right. So ViiV is actually 3 pharma companies, but it's the two big ones and one maybe a smaller one. So GlaxoSmithKline, Pfizer, and Shionogi are the owners of ViiV. GlaxoSmithKline is the majority owner, owns about 78%. Pfizer owns around 10%, and Shionogi the rest. And Shionogi is a Japanese company. And so how ViiV came about was that basically GSK and Pfizer came together and brought their HIV portfolios together to create this company. And then Shionogi came along and really worked with some of the GSK scientists to develop the second generation integrase inhibitors that have really launched ViiV. So that's dolutegravir and cabotegravir now. And so, yeah, it's pretty unique. But they basically said, if we created a company that was 100% focused on HIV, could it be more effective? Could you bring all of the most passionate investigators together to really dive in a way that, is not competing with other disease areas within a big pharma company, but it's 100% focused. And I think, this was sort of the brainchild of the CEO of GSK at the time. And, I think he said he came to him in the shower. But
shower is a great place to come up with a great idea.
Get your head cleared up there. But, it ended up being a brilliant idea that ultimately has made such a difference, I think, in HIV drug development, because I think the people that come into ViiV are people, you come here knowing we focus 100% on HIV. So if you want to be an HIV researcher, ViiV is one of the places you'd love to be because, you're surrounded by people who are 100% focused on HIV solutions. So, the researchers are here, the commercial teams are here, the medical affairs people are here. You've got everybody who, knows how to do the research, then communicate the findings, and then take a product to market. And so that's what we've been successful at doing since the first product that we launched as ViiV was in 2013. That was dolutegravir, and it's been extremely successful.
So do you think, so we make it a big, ginormous powerhouse as well? And oftentimes when you become a powerhouse, that it kind of also discourage other people to create another company because there's a big powerhouse. Maybe we should, or do you think that's not how it works?
Well, no one else has created a company that's focused like this, but other companies are certainly still, investing in HIV research. So, there's a number of companies that are still making HIV drugs, and to some degree they're our competitors, but in reality, I think we push each other, and it ultimately leads to there being better and better drugs because you're always wanting to up the ante and come to patients with the next thing that can help improve their lives. And so I think it's a good thing that there's competition, because if there weren't competition, there would be no motivation to keep doing better.
Right. So that's good, because I think that's when I think about this major powerhouse, team up together, kind of kill all the competition, and then it kind of.
No, there's still plenty of other competition. But the thing about HIV that has been has been really important is that because treatment is not one drug, it's always at least two drugs. And in the early days, no company had a whole bunch of drugs. Each company would have one. And so the companies actually worked together to bring their drugs together to create regimens because you needed to have combinations. Nowadays, all of the companies that are work in HIV have multiple drugs within their particular portfolios and pipelines, but still all the drugs get used together. And so, it's not like, one company is just going to have the whole field at this point. If anything, I think there's a lot of startups that are still trying to develop new drugs. And then we're always talking to people about, new drugs that they're looking to develop and whether or not there's something that we can help them with, or can we bring it into ViiV and bring it into a bigger company.
This podcast is sponsored by Brown Rudnick's Global Life Sciences Group, a team of legal professionals that help life science companies, lenders, and investors around the world turn good science into good business. Learn more at brownrudnick.com. This podcast is also sponsored by Canon Quality Group. Canon Quality Group has been helping medtech startups set up quality management systems for over 10 years. If you're unsure when to get started with quality management in your startup, turn to the experts at canonqualitygroup.com.
So my next question, you're spending a lot of your first part of your career being in hospital, kind of clinic, kind of academia in a way, and moving to kind of a corporate world. What are the lessons that you learned from being in a clinic and a university academia that you think helped you thrive and be successful in your current position? And what are the other part that you have to learn that you did not know?
Well, certainly being in an academic environment, you learn, what does it take to design studies, to get those studies funded, and how do you design research questions? You learn how to become a researcher, and you get an opportunity to be close to the patient, to be connected to the patient, to hear the patient and understand what their needs are. And for me, it was always that my research was focused on addressing, really underrepresented populations, trying to, improve outcomes for populations that weren't doing as well on treatment, African Americans, women in some cases. And so, that energy, that passion that I had there really set me up to be able to come to industry and bring that same passion. I kind of warned folks before they hired me that I was going to be a troublemaker, and that I was always going to be, advocating for making sure that our clinical trials represented people of color adequately, that we had appropriate enrollment of women, that we were answering the questions that patients were asking, that it wasn't just about, can you make a drug that's going to sell well, but is it a drug that is going to improve the life of the people who you make that drug for? And so, that time I spent in clinical care and the academic environment taught me how to be a researcher, but taught me also about delivering for patients and that relationship with patients. I mean, I so many years I took care of, I met individuals, they became my patient. They were my patient for the next decade. And so you had that relationship that, there's nothing that is, I think nothing can replace that experience of being able to have a relationship with a patient where, they're counting on you to guide them through this very difficult disease. And so I took those learnings and brought those to the corporate environment. What are the things that I didn't learn about and I had to learn about in corporate? Well, I guess we move at a faster pace, no question. In academics, you're not things, as you know well, tend to move kind of, you spend forever writing the grant, and then you spend forever waiting on the grant to get reviewed and do you get approved? And there's a lot of things just don't move as fast. Whereas in industry, you're not, when you make a decision to move forward on a project, the resources are there and you're moving at pace. The expectation is that you're moving at pace. So everything is much faster. Certainly, the reputation of pharma is quite negative. The assumption is that if you work for pharma, that it's all about money, and it's all about it's not about the patients. And so I had to get used to the fact that people might see me differently than they'd seen me before I was in the corporate environment. And I've had to demonstrate in the current setting that it's still me. I'm still the same person who was advocating for access to medicine regardless of your ability to pay, appropriate representation in clinical trials, all of that. So I'm still the same person who was fighting for that before the corporate environment and now within the corporate environment. And, I'm fortunate that I've come, I'll say it differently, because to say I'm fortunate that I've come to a company that does that work and has those commitments, it's not really fortunate. I never would have joined pharma if it wasn't a company that I thought had the right values and had the right mission. And so, our mission at ViiV is to leave no patient living with HIV behind. And so that says we're developing drugs not just for, the masses that potentially is going to be a big seller, but also for children, most of whom are in resource limited settings where, there's not going to be profit made from those products, but it's going to absolutely change and save lives. Mm-hmm. We also, develop drugs for people who have multi-drug resistance. That's a small population of people, but it's a population of people that if they don't get, new drugs, they're not going to survive. So, we make sure that our drugs are tested for people who have not only HIV, but also tuberculosis, so that you can treat both their HIV and tuberculosis safely. So, this is this kind of company that I now get to help shape the future. But that's the only place I could see myself being, in a company that lived my values. And so, I feel very fortunate because, it's a unique opportunity, and I can say certainly the best job I've ever had in my life, because I get to impact so many people around the world.
And I think I sounded that you also have the opportunity to shape it.
Mm-hmm. To continue to shape it. Yes. Yes. And a good example of that is, when we, so we've been developing a drug for HIV prevention, and it's a long-acting drug. It's a shot you take every 2 months. So when we were designing the studies for that in the last few years, we made sure that those studies included the populations most impacted in the United States, and that is Black men who have sex with men. If you look at the statistics in the U.S., that it's just disproportionately of the 36 or 38,000 cases that happen in the U.S. every year, a huge chunk of them are Black men who have sex with men. And so, but the clinical trials of PrEP agents, prevention agents for HIV in the past, did not do a good job of representing that population. And so when we designed the study that we did in collaboration with the National Institute of Health, the HIV Prevention Trials Network, we said, listen, and we were all on the same page that we're going to do this differently. We're not going to just have studies that will focus on, the population of white men who have sex with men. They've been the population study before. Let's make sure that we study Black men who have sex with men And then let's make sure that we actually study women. So a lot of the PrEP studies didn't study women, or in some cases, the PrEP studies didn't demonstrate the benefit of the medicine for women. And we were, at the time that we designed these two major studies that delivered last year, at the time, there weren't a lot of studies that had shown really a lot of success for PrEP for women. And so we designed two big studies. One that was men who have sex with men and transgender women, and transgender populations are always underrepresented, but at very, very, increased vulnerability to HIV. There are populations that have a disproportionate impact of HIV. And so we made sure that those studies had those populations in them. And so, when the results came out and we ended up showing that this drug was really effective and more effective than daily oral medicine, it was thrilling, not just because the drug worked great, but because it worked great in the populations who need it the most. And so that was, but that's an example of the ability to shape, how you study drugs, how you deliver drugs. And then, next, once we launch this, hopefully next year, how you make it available and get it into the populations that need it the most.
So do you think in the past, it was more like when they did a clinical study, they just put out like, hey, we're looking for, there's no specific ask for that particular certain population. It's more like general population intake.
Most of the time it was who's the most easy to enroll and readily available population. Let's go to, where to the clinics we've been going to for a long time. Let's, and whoever comes is who comes, as opposed to saying, we want to make sure that the makeup of the study includes a population that hasn't been represented. And so how are we going to do that? How are we going to go about finding that population and letting them know about this study? Because the thing is that, some of the, I think, misperception is that communities of color are not interested in participating in clinical trials. When in reality, I think it's that people of color are often not asked to participate in clinical trials. And so you need to, go to people where they are, let them know what opportunities for clinical trials are there, and make it easy for them to be able to participate if they want to. And that's what this trial did in the U.S. and the women's trial was mostly in sub-Saharan Africa. And again, we take it to where people need it the most.
So how, I feel like now in the U.S. when you have HIV, you have options, and in a different part of the world, it still can be really deadly. And how does ViiV work in more like as a public health, but more like global public health?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, we've made a commitment to make our medicines accessible to people no matter where they live in the world, and even in the least developed countries. And so basically, we give voluntary licenses to generic companies to make our drugs at the cheapest cost possible in order to make them available in, the least developed countries. And so places like South Africa. So for example, dolutegravir, which is, an extremely effective drug that is, it's on the preferred recommended medicines on guidelines around the world, including the U.S. So it is the best that's available out there for HIV treatment. That's available to people in sub-Saharan Africa that are everywhere in, every possible place we could launch it in the world. And so now there are 38 million people roughly living with HIV. About 18 million of those are on a dolutegravir-based regimen. So, our commitment to making our medicines available has, I think, had a tremendous impact. Because they're just effective drugs that are well tolerated. And so getting the best drugs to everybody was really our mission. And then we made a child friendly formulation of it so that, again, the best drug could be available not only to adults, but also to children. Because for children living with HIV, they have way fewer options available to them than adults. And so, that's the commitment that the company has made to make our medicines available. And so the same thing will be true for our long-acting medicine. We intend to make it, particularly for PrEP, make it available in the environments where where really high rates of HIV infections are occurring.
So I remember I moved to this country in the 90s, and we start seeing some of the, I think I remember Magic Johnson when he admitted that he has HIV. That was the biggest things. But at the same time, now you don't hear it so much anymore. I mean, of course, COVID is taking over all our news channel. Do you see that as a day when maybe HIV will be completely eradicated, and how to get there?
I hope so. I will tell you that our commitment as a company is not only to make medicines to treat HIV, but also to do the research on getting to a cure. So getting to something where you can actually not require people to continue to take medicines for the rest of their life. And so, we're contributing to it. Other pharma companies are contributing to it, and there's lots of researchers around the world that are working towards an HIV cure. It's tough, obviously, 40 years now into the epidemic, but I do believe there's good progress that's being made, and I hope in my lifetime, maybe even in the next decade, that we'll have some really good progress towards a cure. So I don't think it's going to happen around the corner, but I don't think it's impossible to get there.
I know we are close to our time, and I would not want to end our conversation without asking you the question of what is your 3 biggest lessons learned that now looking back, that you always remember the mistake that you make, but you always remember it because you overcome that and that you can share.
Well, I just say don't give up. You're always going to run into challenges. You're always going to run into things that will, that really make you think you can't continue, or that this isn't for you, or and it's just, if you have passion and energy for something, you're going to find a way to get there. You just keep going and don't give up. Think of it like a marathon or any other, just there, you dig deep and there's something there to help you get, help you make the next step. So, being, and I mentioned, when I just deciding to go to med school and become a physician, I mean, no one in my family was a physician. Actually, they were rare individuals in my family that even had gone to college. And so, that it wasn't preordained that it was going to happen for me, but I was committed, and I had, a supportive environment, and I was determined. And so I've used that kind of determination to get me through my career. So it's that, you don't have to come from, a family of doctors or from a particular environment to make your career happen in the way you want it to. You have to just see it and make it happen. So that's one point. Don't give up. But the second point is relationships are important. Take them seriously. I talked about people who mentored me throughout my life, in my career. You develop those relationships with people, and it might be 10 years later that you'll come across them again. And if you develop a strong relationship, you never know how that can impact your career, your future. So, I talked about the fact that part of me coming into this role was a relationship with my mentor. And let's see, he was my mentor up till 1998. Then he went off in the industry, but we kept in touch. And 15 years later, in 2013, is when, we came together for me to come and join this company. So that relationship was critical to, giving me the opportunity to be in the role that I'm in now. So relationships are important, and so cultivate them. And, I guess if I had to say what's the third thing, it is, be yourself, be your genuine self, and be humble. Always think about, all the opportunities that you've been given that helped you to get to where you are, and appreciate them. But bring your genuine, authentic self. And then, you don't have to compete with anybody else to be you. You're the only you out there, right? So just be you. And, that's probably what I would say are sort of off the cuff, 3 quick life lessons.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you. I know you mentioned that when, your experience with your patient that cannot kind of your North Star compass as you do. Can you share, is there like one story that you can share that, it really touched you, that when the going is hard, that you look back to that can help you move forward?
Oh boy, there's so many stories of people that I've had the opportunity to care for and be a part of their journey. And they've all taught me something. But I guess, I just think about always feeling like you have to hear what people are saying to you. And so in some of the early days with treatment, I would have one patient in particular. She just struggled with taking her medicines consistently. And she would come to me and she would tell me that she had this challenge or that challenge. And, it was sometimes I kind of just, I would get a little frustrated. I want her to just take your medicines, consistently. And then we'd be good. You do so much better. But, ultimately it took a while for me to really understand that she was struggling with, all of the burdens that came from taking a medicine, dealing with the side effects, trying to live your life, feeling the stigma, just the incredible weight of HIV. And, what I learned from her and all of my patients is that, if you're not walking in somebody else's shoes, you can't really appreciate what they're going through. And so I tried to learn to have that kind of that compassion and that empathy to really hear what she was saying to me about the medicines and what the challenges were. And I've taken that learning into this part of my career to say, how do we make medicines that take away that burden, take as much of that burden as we can lift away, that daily reminder of living with HIV every time you take your pill. For her, almost constant nausea that she experienced, and just I'm such a wimp. If I'm nauseated, I got to go lay down. I can't. It's not like I'm going to be able to function. But you think about people sort of living with nausea almost all the time and having to learn to live with it in order to take the medicine that was allowing us to survive. So it's hearing all of that and turning it into an education that allows you to do something different for people. So the patients are my North Star. When I talk to my teams, that's exactly the phrase that I use, is to say patients are our North Star. They guide us towards what we want to deliver. And if we stop following that North Star, we're lost. And so that's the learning from really being in the trenches and getting the opportunity to be a part of people's lives and their journey.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us your story.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Health Technology Podcast. We want to thank our executive producer, Herminio Neto, and our podcast engineer, Andrew Rojek. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. The Health Technology Podcast is available on all major platforms.